episode is brought to you by Support the Mountain's Herbal Parasite Cleanse. This formula targets the small and large intestinal tracts and larvae, the most broad-spectrum formula available today. 100% organic, formulated by Dr. Mikio Sankey, author of the Esoteric Acupuncture series. For 10% off your first bottle, visit shopyogahub.com and use the coupon code CLEANSE at checkout. Hello and welcome to YHTV's Magical Medical Tour. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Christina Suzuma, and with me is our wonderful medical guide, Dr. Glenn Woolman. Hello, Dr. Woolman.
Greetings, Christina. Good to see you.
Good to see you too.
How's life?
Bouncy.
Ready, huh? Yeah, I don't blame you. We have a great show today.
Oh, yes, I am so looking forward to it.
Yes, greetings, everyone. Welcome to Magical Medical Tour. I'm Dr. Glenn Woolman. I will be your medical guide, along with Christina today, as we travel through yet another quadrant of the healthcare galaxy, searching for optimal health. And today, we're going into an area that I really like a lot. You know, when we talk about medicine, we talk about nursing and delivery of healthcare, and we have this pill that we give you because we've diagnosed this disease, and this pill is going to help you. All the doctors and nurses do that, but where does that pill really come from? Well, we know it comes from the pharmaceutical companies, but where do they come up with the idea? And it's the scientists and the researchers that come up with these ideas. And today we're going to be speaking with Dominic D'Agostino. He's a doctor and an assistant professor in the Department of Molecular Pharmacology and Physiology at the University of South Florida. His laboratories work on looking at diseases and looking for metabolic pathologies and solutions. And he's worked in areas of calorie restriction, special ketogenic diets, which we'll talk about, oxygen toxicity, which we talked about when we did our show on hyperbaric chambers. He's looking at treatments for seizure disorders and epilepsy, a number of metabolic disorders, Alzheimer's disease, ALS, we talked about ALS, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, Lou Gehrig's disease, muscle wasting disease, and cancer. So we're going to be speaking with Dr. D'Agostino today to find out what it's like being in the research world in terms of health and medicine. But before we do, how do people get in touch with us, Christina?
Thanks, Dr. Woolman. Now, at any time during the show, you can feel free to ask a question or make a comment simply by scrolling down on your screen and typing it into the comment box. Now, if you're just so happen listening to this through a podcast, you can call us at any time at 818-LETS-TALK. 818-LETS-TALK. And we love comments and questions, and if it's for our special guest or for Dr. Woolman, we will make sure to get it over to them at any time. Because, you know, we know podcasts, you might be listening to this a year down the line or anything like that. We will make sure to still forward your message. And make sure you leave your contact information if you would like your question answered. Thank you so much.
Great. So I first listened to Dr. D'Agostino on Bulletproof Radio. It was episode 85. He was talking about mastering ketosis. He's done a number of Bulletproof Radio shows. He's also done a number of TED Talks. So I think he's qualified to be on our show today. And I think I would like to take this time to introduce to you and to all of our guests, Dr. Dominic D'Agostino. Welcome.
Thank you, Glenn and Christina. It's great to be here.
Great. Well, thank you
Appreciate
for joining us. Yes. Yeah, well, sure. we're honored to come play with you now.
Ready to play. Yeah.
Ready to play.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, Dom, as the medical guide, I usually like to tell our listeners the path that I'm hoping we're going to take today. We're going to first learn a little bit about you, of course, what got you into medicine and research and science, and where you went with the research. We're going to talk a little bit about research so people can understand that, how someone can go along your path and take the steps through education, etc. Then we want to get into what research is a little bit about. We want to go into some of the areas that you specifically work in, and then we want to look at the future of science and medicine and your future in research. How's that sound to you?
Great. Yeah, I'm ready.
Excellent. Well, we'll see.
Okay.
Yeah. So let's start right from the beginning. What got you interested in becoming a scientist and then into research, and then we could talk about the field that you chose? What were your influences?
Well, I guess it goes back really to high school biology. And, I wasn't the best student in the world, but I did challenge myself in high school with an honors biology course. And that my teacher that I had at the time really pushed me and inspired me to learn. And around the same time, I got into fitness and nutrition, so I wanted to learn more about my body to understand how I could manipulate it, I guess, to just enhance my strength and performance on the football field. So that it was sort of maybe a self-interest in understanding my body more and how I could manipulate nutrition and supplements for performance. And when I majored in biology and nutrition in college, I just, the more questions that we answered, or that got answered that I had, the more questions, that came out of answering those questions. So in regards to nutrition, I always felt that nutrition was a very powerful metabolic therapy. That's what we call it, and you can manipulate nutrition in ways to promote longevity, for obviously for prevention of many diseases, and to really target a vast array of pathologies that are out there that are currently being, the drug companies have jumped on. So, during my undergraduate years at Rutgers University, I, like many undergraduates do, they seek out to do research in a laboratory. And I was more or less seeking research because I knew I needed it for my resume to get into medical school as a reference. So I was like, let me try to get some basic science research, and then I'll look more attractive, when I start applying to medical schools. And when I did my senior research project, I became I really embraced the scientific method. And I had a wonderful mentor at the time, and it was in a clinical department, whereas most students that do research kind of work, in a bench lab and really don't get to see patients. But I worked in a medical department, internal medicine, and that gave me the opportunity to see how science would be translated into therapies. And I worked under a number of great medical doctors and MD PhDs. And that research was on the neural control of autonomic regulation. So how our brain controls our physiology, including our heart rate and our respiration. So it gave me my undergraduate research experience really inspired me to understand the body as a whole. Not just neuroscience, or not just cardiovascular physiology, but really how the brain controls our physiology. And I was inspired, instead of going to medical school, to pursue a PhD, and because I felt I didn't know enough. I felt I wanted to know more, and that PhD, took another 5 years of school, and I continued doing it at my undergraduate research, or their medical school there, University of Medicine, Dentistry of New Jersey. And that led ultimately to my path. As a neuroscientist, my focus was really looking at seizures as they relate to different disorders that arise during special operations diving. So when I finished my PhD, I wrote a postdoctoral fellowship grant, and that grant was funded by the Office of Navy Research to understand how high levels of oxygen and high levels of various gases affect the brain and our physiology. And under certain conditions where a diver will breathe 100% oxygen, And this is sort of more or less in the realms of special operations diving done by Navy SEALs and other special operations units. They will encounter a problem called oxygen toxicity. And my grant was essentially to understand the cellular and molecular mechanisms of oxygen toxicity and to develop ways to predict it and more importantly, to prevent it. And in the process of understanding oxygen toxicity of the brain, I delved into fundamentally what's going on with brain metabolism. And it was a bit of a leap, but I transitioned from looking to pharmacological approaches to a nutritional approach. And this was inspired by the use of the ketogenic diet for drug refractory or drug resistant epilepsy. So when drugs fail to control seizures, it was accepted in medical practice, even as a standard of care, to put patients on a carbohydrate-restricted ketogenic diet. And the mechanism is not fully understood. The neuropharmacology of the ketogenic diet is a very intense area of research now, but it happened to be a very effective approach for the problem that I was contracted to solve, which was oxygen toxicity seizures. So the military and other investigators had looked at a broad array of, strategies mitigation strategies to prevent oxygen toxicity. And I became inspired by some of the work showing that starvation, ketosis, or fasting can enhance brain energy metabolism that confers protection against these oxygen seizures. So that really inspired me to develop and test the metabolic therapies that we're using now in our lab. And the work started during my postdoctoral fellowship, and now it has transferred into expanding applications to my position now, which is assistant professor here at the College of Medicine.
Speaking of that, one of the things we do on our show, that was pretty inspiring to listen to that whole thing. I know that you work with the Navy SEALs, the Department of the Navy, you work with NASA. There's a lot of areas that we're going to cover as we move forward. We always talk for people that are listening to our show, and some people are looking for careers. If someone wanted a career in research or doing what you do, what are the steps that need to be taken?
That's a good question, because I get that question a lot. And I would tell them to do sort of what I did. We all have specific things that we're interested in, right? Right. I would find the investigators that are doing those things that you're very passionate about. And the best way to do it is basically to go on PubMed or Medline and search out the kind of research that people are doing. Say someone's researching, say you're interested in phytonutrients, or say you're interested in the ketogenic diet. So you would, do a search on the ketogenic diet and pull some papers on it and see who the authors are and see where those institutes are. And then, if wherever you want to be, if a particular person is in proximity to you, you would reach out. Usually there's contact information on the corresponding author's contact information is typically on a publication, whether it be their phone number or their email. And what I did is just, reach out to, when I stumbled upon this idea of nutritional ketosis, I probably pulled the contact information of 20 or 30 different people. And I was on the phone with those people to determine, to figure out how they got into their field of research, how they get their funding, what their life is like day to day, what path they see themselves, going into. So you really got to determine, the people that are doing what you want to do. And, don't be shy. You got to reach out to them and connect with them. It's all about building relationships. And you might not know it, but you connect with one person, and that person connects you to a network of other people, and and you get the opportunity, for example, if you're a student, to do some research that you never thought you could do. And a lot of investigators will welcome the opportunity of a high school student or an undergraduate to shadow other students or investigators in the lab. And if that student performs, and that, I know in my case, if I see that the student is very passionate about the research, which is first and foremost the most important thing for me, I'll give that student an opportunity and, maybe even set them up for like a paid position. But they sort of have to prove themselves first with their interest, their knowledge on a particular subject, and then we can explore, other opportunities if they want to pursue a PhD or something like that.
What kind of personality do you need to be a researcher? What is your life like?
Well, I would say my lab is very eclectic. It's a broad array of different personalities. But as a principal investigator or a leader of the lab, I like to position those people position them in a way where they could best use their expertise. And I think that's important. And I think you really have to know the people you're working for on a personal level. And I like to sit down in my office face to face with my graduate students and even undergraduates and postdocs and figure out really what inspires them. And if you put them on a task that they're capable of doing and that they're passionate about, they're going to do much better than if you put them on a task that they're not very enthusiastic about. So what I like to do is kind of hand select people based on the needs of the lab to make sure that they're happy and they have a right fit. And I think that's probably the most important thing, to understand the people that are working for you, because it's those people that are really the motor behind your lab. You're kind of steering the boat, but if you got to be good to your people, and you have to understand them from the basic, most fundamental level, and then you can better carve out a position in the lab based on tasks that need to be done in the lab. I have a PhD student in my lab now, and she's just amazing with surgical techniques. Her hands are just so I have her handle some of the surgery type procedures. Other students, they just love data. Just give them data, and they love to do statistics. They'll analyze it in every shape and form possible, and it's just like, you got 5 projects and just give them the data, and they love to manipulate the data and do all sorts of statistical tests on it. Other people like to design diets and basically do formulating in the lab and do mixing and measuring out and things like that. So really, you really have to know the people and make sure that they're the right fit for you, that they fit in the lab culturally, so to speak.
What's the best part of this for you? Where's the magic in it? Where do you still get your joy?
The magic for me, and I think this would apply to any endeavor that you do, is the opportunity to contribute to something much bigger and greater than yourself, than a publication or a book or whatever. It's really getting information out there that people can use, and providing a service to people is really the most, in giving back. So I had so many, I'm very grateful for all the mentors that I've had, for all the the very charitable mentors, with their time, with their resources to send me to meetings. And also my mentors introduced me to people that opened doors that I would otherwise not have. And the magic for me is to now be in that opportunity where I'm a mentor, where I can send my students, to another country to present their work and connect with other people, which is always a joy, and to give them that opportunity when they otherwise, wouldn't have it, and actually have them kind of take on some of the roles that I'm doing now. Maybe I get kind of overloaded with teaching, so I will ask, and the people working under me, students that have maybe already got a PhD working under me in another lab, and give them some of my teaching jobs. So that it works great for me, right? Because I'm not weighted down with teaching, and I give them the opportunity to teach a course, develop a curriculum, put it on their resume. So that becomes really important. But I think the magic is about building relationships and giving back. And the more I get along in science, the more I realize that that's really the most important thing, and that's what makes me happy. It doesn't matter how many grants you have or how many publications you have. If you're not connecting with people, building relationships, and providing a valuable service to others, it's not going to be fulfilling.
Very nice. I like that. So Dom, you're in the neurosciences. You're a molecular pharmacologist. You're a molecular physiologist. When I worked in the emergency department, or I'm trying to figure out someone's level of consciousness, I can ask them certain questions and analyze whether they're alert and they're oriented to time and place and person, whether they can analyze things, memorize things, etc. So I can understand consciousness in terms of how to measure it, but I don't understand how consciousness happens. Can you explain consciousness to me and to our audience? And within that, also tell us about the mind. Maybe they're connected.
Well, consciousness is a very complex. It's a very complex subject. I mean, there's a lot of things we don't understand, and that's what really got me into the path of neuroscience. I wanted, the brain controls everything. I mean, it's our reality. It shapes the world that we live in. Our internal representations are just, a product of how our consciousness, interprets everything. So I'm not sure I could sufficiently answer your question. It's sort of like asking the question, well, if someone says they understand quantum mechanics, if someone tells you that they understand quantum mechanics, you could bet that they definitely don't understand quantum mechanics, because no one understands quantum mechanics. The people who wrote the books on quantum mechanics don't understand quantum mechanics. Great. Which made me even more motivated to try to understand quantum mechanics, but I've given up. So I would say the same thing could really apply to consciousness. Consciousness, obviously that's part of the individuality of humans and animals too, is that we all have a different consciousness and perceive the world differently, which is maybe different than consciousness. But from a fundamental neuroscience perspective, I could break it down into action potentials of neurons and the resting membrane potential of the cells within the CA1 region of the hippocampus. So this is what, which controls learning and memory. So these are things that we do in the lab. We record directly from areas of the brain, for example, that control, autonomic regulation or learning and memory. And we seek to understand how to correct their activity when something goes wrong, and we seek to also just fundamentally understand how the brain cells communicate to one another. So neurons in the brain will have processes, and one neuron can make a connection to 10,000 other neurons, right? So that creates infinite a number of possibilities of connections. So what we have the ability to do is to understand fundamentally how those neurons are communicating to one another, why they don't communicate to one another in a proper way, and to better develop my expertise as a metabolic therapy that can preserve consciousness homeostasis, so brain metabolism, I guess you would say, is what I focus on. And we developed metabolic therapies that can preserve brain metabolism under environmental extremes. So that would be some of the military work that we're contracted, but this would also apply and have implications for neurological pathologies that result from, in one way or another, impaired brain energy metabolism. And that is really tightly linked to our environment, our nutritional status, our mental, emotional well-being. So the interrelationship behind all these things is very complex and not something we directly study. You know, as scientists, we kind of break things down to reduced preparations, but we'll understand things from their very basic components all the way up to behavioral studies and in between. But so that was a very convoluted answer to your question, but I'm just kind of bringing you, you know, kind of my perspective. The basis of consciousness is something that really inspired me to go into this field. And it's not a question that I could easily answer because I don't know. You know,
we don't ask the easy questions.
Yeah, I get that. So that's good. Kind of put me on the spot there. But we do, you know, we do understand there's a certain, you know, processes that can enhance our reality or enhance our consciousness. And what we look at are ways to further augment and enhance the consciousness that we have to improve our situation and our reality. And I think and that can come, there's many ways to do that. You could do it nutritionally, pharmacologically, you could do it with various herbs and supplements that are out there, and also, you know, environment. I think, you know, going back to relationships, I think, you know, healthy relationships is probably one of the best things you could do for brain health. You know, nice. Going outside, fresh air, sunshine, you know, some of the basic things. We as scientists are now realizing that these things are probably the most important things to focus on. And I think clinicians are starting to realize this too with their patients.
Any quick definition of mind?
Of mind. Quick definition.
Okay, a slower one.
I don't think so. Yeah. That's so you've basically stumped my mind here. Your mind is your, I would say, you know, your internal representation of what the world is, and I think that for me has changed radically. My world vision or my perception of what I, you know, perceive as reality has changed dramatically from my teenage years to the college years to now. And that falls back on a lot of different things. Your worldview can influence that. You know, I think if you're going to ask that question, the best way to do it is, you know, to ask someone like, what inspires you? Why do you do what you do? And fundamentally, sometimes people really don't think about why they do what they do, but we really need to take time to meditate. We need quiet time. We need to reserve time every day to reflect on what we're grateful for and what's most important. And I would say that's the mind for me. It's mindful living, is actually paying attention to do, you know, to understand why you do what you do. And I think that's probably the most important thing. And I sometimes, you know, I don't follow through with that. Sometimes, you know, I'll come to work and I feel like you know, just one task, you know, I'm handling one task after another, but not really taking a step back and prioritizing the things that are most important. Like, you know, did I call my mom, or, you know, did I follow up with this friend that was going through a crisis or something like that, or did I get back to that patient who just had a question about the ketogenic diet? You know, some of these things are more important things than daily tasks that are pressing, you know, or appear to be pressing.
You keep mentioning the ketogenic diet. And we're going to talk about that in just a moment. I think that the research that's happening now is going to be mainly about the neurosciences. I think it's our final frontier, other than on a cellular level, that the brain and the nervous system are where the future is going to be. And hopefully we'll talk about that a little bit near the end. But I want to talk about research in general for a moment and then get more specifically into your research. How does a research project happen? Is it something you think about, or you get notified by NASA that they want to deal with the astronauts or the Navy SEALs? How does a research project actually happen?
Well, with money, partly, but there's a question, there's a question that needs to be answered. And that could be, what is the molecular mechanism, of this type of cancer or something like that. So it usually starts out, there's a call for proposals. So what you can do as a research scientist is just go on the NIH website, go on, the Department of Defense website. We do some contracted work with foundations, so we could go to the ALS, foundation website or rare metabolic disorders and see if they are actively funding projects, in this area. One of the issues with being a researcher in a pharmacology department, but doing nutrition research, but we're sort of understanding the neuropharmacology of the ketogenic diet. So it is pharmacology, so to speak. You basically look to see what funding opportunities are available. Of course, you pick the funding opportunities. You pick a problem that you're most adept to understanding and answering with the tools that you have. And you write up a proposal, starting with specific aims, starting with a hypothesis, starting with a question, right? And then a hypothesis, and then specific aims that address that particular problem that you're addressing. And then you send in a proposal to a government or private agency, and you hope to hear back that they like your idea. And sometimes you submit like a letter of intent first. And they're like, okay, we like the idea, and then we'll encourage you to write a full proposal. And then they may or may not fund it. Or you can just go ahead and write a full proposal and then submit it. Typically, it's based upon a request for a specific area of research. Sometimes you can submit a proposal that's a completely novel idea that they're not necessarily asking for, and just hope that, they find your idea and your strategy very innovative, and they say, this is something we would consider funding, so write us a full proposal on that. Or research could happen if in industry, for example, there are various companies out there who are interested in answering a particular question, and, that could potentially support some product that they have or some intellectual question that they have. So we have, one or two contracts with companies that just reached out to us and said, what if you do this project? And we're really interested in seeing the results for that. And that's very rare. You come across, companies with money who just want to answer a scientific question without any kind of agenda. Occasionally that happens, but more likely, a company will have a product, and they might reach out to you and say, you're an expert in this area of nutrition. Well, we developed this nutritional supplement, and we want to see if it can, reduce fat levels in a study. So we would like to test this. Or some companies are interested in testing their particular products in an animal model of ALS or a seizure model or a cancer model. So we have the ability, these tools are available. So if a company, for example, has a particular product that they think would be useful in enhancing learning and memory in an Alzheimer's mouse model, then we could study that. And that preclinical data would, safety data and preclinical data would be good grounds to then go on to a human trial which, this is how science works. You kind of work up the ladder.
When you are approached by a company that wants to do something, obviously the company wants a good result. And this is one of the things that we always are concerned about when we read articles and journals and papers. This drug is excellent, but then we find out it was sponsored by the company that makes the drug. And so we get concerned about bias. How does bias work in your work research?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Well, we're not actively doing any contracted research for companies that have drugs or even nutritional products, really. We develop our own stuff, and then companies will come to us. But that's a very good question, because I see it a lot among other researchers and universities. And when I get a paper and it's a particular drug, I'll go right to the acknowledgments and basically determine where did the funding come from for this study. We are, for example, we're doing some research right now with ALS on the Deanna protocol. So Deanna was an ALS patient, and her father, who was a retired orthopedic surgeon, tested a few supplements out on her that, most people are familiar with: soluble coenzyme Q10 and GABA, and a combination of supplements that are coined the Deanna protocol. And this foundation, called Winning the Fight Against Neurological Diseases, reached out to us, and they sincerely wanted to determine the efficacy and the mechanism of this in an animal model of ALS, which mimics the familial form or genetic ALS. There are about 10 or 20% of people who have ALS. It's genetic, but the pathology is very similar to people who have sporadic ALS. So, when we do research like this, what we'll do is have someone will formulate the diets, with the various supplements, and the person giving the diet is different from the person that's doing the motor function tests on the animals, and there's a treadmill device, sort of like we have, called a rotarod. There's various behavioral tests that we'll do to assess the motor function of the animal. So that person is blinded, right? And there is usually a key that we can refer to. So the person feeding the animals is different from the person that's actually performing the tests. And then we don't really know the results until the end. And even at the end, when we harvest the tissues and the blood of this, we can send it out to an independent laboratory, and it just has a code on it with a number, and then all the data comes back to us. And then we have the key, and then we can see what groups did good relative to the control. And we write this up as a publication. If it was funded by a particular company or foundation, we'll just state that in the manuscript. And any manuscript of high merit will have to go through the peer review process, and it's anonymous. So, and some of the people reviewing your work may not necessarily want that work out there. So it may conflict with some of their findings. If it's a nutritional approach, and people reviewing it are funded by drug companies that are coming out with a drug, the target, this is just inherent in the process. But that's typically, so there's safeguards, to prevent that from happening. And of course, if I'm a reviewer and I've gotten papers that were funded by drug companies, then I'll say, well, I want to see the raw data, show me the raw numbers, and was this blinded? If it wasn't blinded, I don't accept this data. I want to see this particular experiment reproduced in a blinded fashion, or I want an independent lab to measure, this particular molecule in the blood instead of the lab that was funded by the drug company, or things like that. So that peer review process is good in many ways. There's some issues to it, because if I'm writing a paper on a particular pathway or drug, I can actually recommend to the editor of the journal to select certain reviewers. They may not necessarily pick those reviewers, but sometimes the community is so small that you're working in. You can guess that at least one of the 10 reviewers that you suggest would get your paper. So there's that. It's anonymous, but there are sort of safeguards. The peer review process is pretty good. It works for the most part, and the better the impact journal, usually the better. Not always, but usually better. So yeah, that's
I think that was
my
good.
answer there. Yeah,
you gave us good things. We always talk about when people that are listening to our show read an article or something. So you talked about going to the acknowledgments and blinded studies. That was very good information for people. So let's start getting into your actual research. And I know you talk about the ketogenic diet and the abilities or potential abilities for treatments in areas of seizures and cancer, number of things. I know that when in medicine, whenever I see ketones in the body, if I'm testing somebody and there's extra ketones in the blood or in the urine or something like that, I start getting nervous because there's a lot of diseases and disease states that this is very dangerous for, and yet you've jumped right into the area of ketones and are actually promoting the process. So if you wouldn't mind, explain a little bit of ketones to our audience and the ketogenic diet briefly, and then we'll get into maybe some of the ways that it can help.
Sure. That's really important to answer these questions right up front. Ketone terminology, if you will.
Yes.
Okay, so ketones historically have been thought of as a bad thing. So elevated ketone levels in the blood were thought to be a byproduct of fat metabolism, and that these ketone bodies, and there's two primarily, were an indication of a pathology, and they were really considered metabolic poison. And in some cases they are. So there's two situations where ketosis is a bad thing. For a type 1 diabetic, you can fall into a situation called diabetic ketoacidosis. Diabetic ketoacidosis occurs only in people who cannot make insulin, so type 1 diabetics. And in that situation, without insulin, your body cannot regulate its production of ketones. So if a type 1 diabetic goes into ketoacidosis, they would need an injection of insulin and then fluids and rehydration. So it's a very specific pathology that occurs only in type 1 diabetics, diabetic ketoacidosis. The other form of ketosis that's pathological is alcoholic ketoacidosis. Mm-hmm. So consumption of alcohol, in particular, after you haven't eaten for a while, if you're fasted and go on an alcohol binge. So emergency rooms, like during Mardi Gras and stuff, see a lot of this, right? So say if I'm in a fasted state and I drink a lot of alcohol, essentially what it's doing is impairing my liver. So it impairs my liver's ability to regulate blood glucose through gluconeogenesis. Mm-hmm. So the liver is actually pumping out glucose. If we haven't eaten it for a while, the liver has glycogen, and it helps maintain glucose levels by breaking down glycogen. And this is called gluconeogenesis. Consuming too much alcohol, in particular in a fasted state, will cause runaway ketogenesis in the liver. And it'll prevent your liver, because it's a metabolically deranged condition. If you're drunk and you're dehydrated and your electrolytes are off, and you can go into diabetic ketoacidosis. So there are the two pathologies. So type 1 diabetics.
Alcoholic ketoacidosis.
Yeah, alcoholic keto. Right. So what did I say? Diabetic. Oh, yeah, alcoholic ketoacidosis and diabetic ketoacidosis are the two pathologies.
Right.
This is much different than starvation ketosis or fasting ketosis. So, and I like to start with fasting first. So if we're eating carbohydrates in our diet, I'm kind of not, so I'm in nutritional ketosis. But if you've, right now, most people who, are watching the show, their brains are being fueled off glucose. In a fed state, 100% of brain energy metabolism essentially is being derived from glucose, the primary source of energy for your brain. If you stop eating today and 4 or 5 days later, roughly more than half of your brain energy metabolism will be coming from ketone bodies. So what happens is that, in the absence of carbohydrates or in the absence of food in general, we mobilize our fat stores to create energy. But fats have an inability to readily cross the blood-brain barrier to preserve brain energy metabolism. So these fats are metabolized in our liver through a process called beta oxidation, and accelerated fat oxidation in the liver contributes to an accumulation of water-soluble fat breakdown products called ketone bodies. So these ketone bodies are very efficient metabolic substrates. They're considered an alternative energy source. And what's most important is that unlike fatty acids, the ketone bodies can quickly cross the blood-brain barrier, and they replace glucose as your primary source of energy for your brain. And this occurs under conditions of therapeutic fasting or starvation, and it allows us to undergo extended periods without food. And it's really why we're able to evolve with such big brains that we have. So you can mimic the effect of fasting ketosis with carbohydrate restriction in the form of a ketogenic diet, which is high fat and low carbohydrate and just moderate to low protein, sufficient amount of proteins. Eating a diet that's high in fat, healthy fats, not hydrogenated fats, so a healthy mix of fats with adequate levels of protein for our bodies, to repair and grow our nails and our hair, things like that, and with a restriction of carbohydrates mimics that physiological state of fasting. So, and it does this by suppressing the hormone insulin. So insulin is a storage hormone, and when insulin level is low, it allows our body to break down fats for energy much more easily. And insulin also drives a lot of anabolic processes and things that grow. So if you have a tumor cells have 5-10 times the amount of insulin receptors the cells actually do. So insulin's a big driver for tumor growth, and we could get into that later. But the idea is that if you shift the macronutrient composition of a diet to a ketogenic diet, which is used clinically by Johns Hopkins and Mayo Clinic, originally developed these protocols. Shifting the macronutrient composition of the diet can put you into nutritional ketosis. That's very different than pathological ketosis. So nutritional ketosis is when your body is breaking down fats, and then you elevate these ketone bodies to a very tight range, usually within, the 1 to 4 millimolar range. And then if your ketone bodies start to get too high, we have compensatory mechanisms that bring it back down. If ketone levels get too high, we start to see them in our urine. And if ketone levels get too high, it actually stimulates the release of insulin from our pancreas, and that quickly shuts off or reduces the level of ketones in our blood. So we have ketone-induced suppression of ketogenesis. So it's a very nice, tightly regulated system in 99% of people, or more. Just the people who are type 1 diabetics can't do this. It's interesting that I have a type 1 diabetic PhD student who is on a ketogenic diet now, and he feels much better, because his brain he's not relying. He can reduce his glucose levels, and by staying in nutritional ketosis, his requirement for insulin is much lower, right? So the least amount of insulin we can use for type 1 diabetic, the better the better off you'll be. You're not as reliant on that because you shifted your metabolism to work off these ketone bodies. It's a little bit trickier for a type 1 diabetic, and that's something that we can come back to. But 99+% of people can do perfectly fine off nutritional ketosis, or ketosis in general, which could be through intermittent fasting, short-term fasting, and a ketogenic diet, which I mentioned is just simply switching out the carbohydrates with fats and keeping your carbohydrate levels low, protein adequate, fat high, and that gets your body to generate these ketone bodies, which are alternative energy sources for your brain, your heart, and other peripheral tissues. And being in that state of nutritional ketosis has many therapeutic benefits that we can go into. It's working much more as an alternative fuel. It has many other effects, so it can enhance many other signaling processes in the body.
One of the things that we get concerned about, we talk about nutrition and diet on this show quite often, and one of the things that I'm concerned about is there are a lot of people out there that diet in an inappropriate way. We have the bulimics, the anorexics, people that are on severe weight loss diets. What can go wrong with this, and should this be done if you're going to choose to be on a ketogenic diet? Should you be doing this under the care of a doctor or a research scientist like yourself?
Yeah, that's a good question. If you're using the ketogenic diet for the metabolic management of a disorder, I would highly suggest, working with a trained dietitian or connecting with a resource that can help you do that. The Charlie Foundation is actually probably the leading ketogenic diet resource out there. And it was started by Hollywood producer Jim Abrams. He produced a number of movies, including Airplane and Naked Gun movies. And his son Charlie had drug-resistant seizures, and these seizures were resistant to every form of drug that he was throwing at it. And he stumbled across in the literature the ketogenic diet that was being used by Johns Hopkins, and it worked remarkably well for him. And Jim had the means to develop a foundation, and that foundation has become an incredible resource. I think there's about 200 worldwide, but 150 clinics in the United States that have dietitians in them that can assist patients with the medical management of epilepsy and other disorders that cause seizures. So this can include metabolic disorders like glucose transporter type 1 deficiency syndrome. It's actually a medical, it's a genetic disease where the brain is starved of glucose, and nutritional ketosis is the only option for these patients. There are no drugs available. So the patients are put on nutritional ketosis, and they have to adhere to these very strict diets to basically be conscious and to suppress the seizures. Well, we're developing ketone supplements that can elevate ketones independent of the ketogenic diet. So these are being tested right now in preclinical models and hopefully tracked towards a medical food type application. But yeah, for a medical disorder, whether it be cancer or seizure disorders, or even other disorders like Parkinson's and Alzheimer's, I think a patient really needs to work with a trained dietitian. Now, if someone has type 2 diabetes or is obese, I think that carbohydrate-restricted ketogenic diet could quickly put someone with type 2 diabetes into remission. So that's a pretty bold statement, right? So
I've seen it work, actually, and it is a bold statement.
Yeah, I am pretty sure that 90+% of people with type 2 diabetes, living with type 2 diabetes, would respond remarkably well to carbohydrate restriction. Maybe not necessarily the level of the ketogenic diet, which is, clinically speaking, it's like 85% fat 10% carbohydrate or 10% protein roughly, and like 5% carbohydrates, but maybe something like a modified Atkins diet, which is kind of a healthy version of the Atkins diet. That's actually being used at Johns Hopkins. I know Dr. Eric Kosoff is really a pioneer in the medical use of the ketogenic diet. He's at Johns Hopkins. And in that situation, I think there are resources out there. I know the ketogenic diet resource.com is really one. I think they even have a book for type 2 diabetes is on the website, and it was written by a doctor and a nutrition expert. So there's a number of resources out there that if you're not using the ketogenic diet specifically to manage something serious, type 2 diabetes is somewhat serious, you can embark on it yourself if you have the proper understanding. And there are books out there that are essentially step-by-step guides and a lot of resources that people can access for free. Alternatively, I always suggest that people work initially with a dietitian to set them up, because a lot of people they don't even understand how to track their macronutrients, when they're like, I'm on a high protein diet because, I eat pasta every day and pasta has protein, right? So there's that's like my mom, right? Or like, other people that I know. It's like, sure. There's the generation that could really benefit from this. Maybe the older generation are not familiar with these scientific terms. Like if you tell them, count your macronutrients, make sure you get X amount of protein, the carbs, and fiber. That's kind of difficult for a lot of people to do. So nutrition, a registered dietitian or a nutritionist can set a person up initially and get them set up with. There's various apps to do this. There's various internet tools that you just type in the foods and it spits out the macronutrient profile and the micronutrient profile, and then you can develop a meal plan based on that. And that can be the great thing about a nutritional therapy is that you get results almost the next day. Within 24 hours, you can have like your blood glucose almost under control. I've seen numbers in the mid 200s, and then literally within 24 hours, they're in the mid 100s and holding, and then they gradually decrease from there, and the difference between a blood glucose of 250 and, 125 is tremendous. I mean, it's going to prevent the rapid acceleration of age-related chronic diseases, if you could bring your blood glucose down and your insulin down.
That's true. The ketogenic diet, certainly we could do a whole hour on this, and I would recommend people that are listening or watching this show go to Dr. D'Agostino's talks on Bulletproof Radio. I think episode 85 was one of them, and then a couple of the TED Talks. Just type them in. There's an enormous amount of stuff on this. In a couple of sentences, what do you see in the future of research 50 years from now?
50 years from now? Well, I think, pharmacology research is going to go on no matter what, right? So I'm in the field of developing and testing what we call metabolic therapies. And that's a term that we use when we write grants, because if we call it a nutritional therapy, reviewers will kind of roll their eyes and say, well, this is the subject of self-help books or something like that. So when we know that nutrition is probably the most powerful thing for prevention and treatment of many illnesses. So I think the future really is there's a emerging interest in nutritional ketosis, but I think nutrition in general as something that doctors will be trained to understand instead of having no training at all. The future doctor will understand how to use food as medicine, and will understand how to implement proper nutrition for prevention. Whether or not the patient follows it, it's another story, but they will be able to provide the patient with the right information. And I really think that metabolism and metabolic therapies, nutritional interventions is the future of medicine, because we need to get on people early to prevent many of these highly preventable diseases with simple nutritional advice and strategies.
Beautiful. Dominic, we're coming to the end of our show, and at this time we always ask our guest for a personal health tip, something that would benefit all of us. Do you have something for us?
A personal health tip.
Sounds like you've given a whole bunch of them already.
Yeah. Well, if I had to just reach out, I'm thinking of things that are important to me. And I know, when the dust clears after the day and I get home, it's really important for me to connect with those that I love. And whether that be your significant other or your pet, or in my case, both. So I like to go for long walks, like at night, and it's a really good way for me to wind down, get exercise at the same time, and kind of connect with nature. And that downtime, the more hectic our lives become, the more essential carving out time for that downtime becomes more important. So people need to take time to reflect on things, what's important, and to just get outside and embrace nature and embrace, relationships that are really important to them.
Beautiful. Christina, any thoughts?
So many. It's the end of the show.
That is a thought.
Yes. I mean, what is really beautiful in this whole show, Dominic, is how you have inspired many to really look at prevention through what we have around us, which is our nutrition, which is about nature. It is about, it's almost going back in time to a generation where that's all people really had. They had to rely on their food sources. They had to rely on exercise out there. And I come from a world of, body work and healing arts. So to hear a researcher say this is just so thrilling for me. And I thank you so much, because in our world today, everybody wants proof. They want scientific proof and fact. And when I speak to other people within the medical field dealing with certain medicines, is always like, well, you've got to prove it. You've got to prove that works, like the Chinese medicines and, the Ayurvedic medicines. And, simply can you just cleanse your nasal passages just once, And next thing you know, what allergy? It's like it's the simplicities of life and nutrition. And thank you so much for inspiring all of us. It's been an honor.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
That's great. I'm very grateful to our very special guest, Dr. Dominic D'Agostino, for his wisdom and experience and expertise. I'd also like to thank my healers and my teachers for keeping me on my journey. Thank you, Christina and Yoga Hub and Segovia, for putting together Magical Medical Tour, our 119th episode. And I'm looking forward to getting together with everyone in our next episode as we travel through another quadrant of the healthcare galaxy, searching for optimal health. Till that time, thank you so much, Dominic. We appreciate it. And I wish you all optimal health.
Thank you, Dr. Glenn Woolman. And thank you again, Dr. Dominic. And we, of course, would like to thank each and every one of you for joining us in this new platform of education and information. We're grateful for your continuous support, and we look forward to hearing your feedback on how we can serve you better. If you would like to connect with Dr. Dominic D'Agostino, we definitely would love for you to visit his website at ketonutrition.org, ketonutrition.org. And of course, you can connect with Dr. Glenn Woolman through his website, glennwoolman.com, where we encourage you to learn about his Metaphor Square Breath. Back to meditation, of course. We're always grateful for any feedback and comments and suggestions that you might have. Give us a call at 818-LETS-TALK, 818-LETS-TALK. So until next time, namaste.
So who are the angels? Who are these loving hands? These hands that we sometimes feel and usually don't. The angels are a vibration more than anything else. They are a group of beings who exist in one particular frequency, one particular vibration, which is only love. The kind of love that we believe in as unconditional, the kind of love that we reach out to when we really need something, the kind of love that is the source